Hi, everybody. Welcome to another amazing Crimson webinar. Welcome to breaking down the top 10 UK universities. Um, my name is Kiri. I'm one of the academic advisors here at Crimson. I've been here for 7 years. And tonight we have a very exciting guest joining us as well, Oxford alumni and Crimson strategy consultant and a wonderful colleague, Christian Kim. Christian will break down the top 10 UK universities so you can find the best fit university for yourself. Before we begin, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping rules with you. There is a panel down at the bottom of everyone's screen. If you have any questions regarding any admin issues or you have some comments to make, or I'll also be having some friendly banter in that area, please use the chat box function. It will also be launching a few polls throughout the session, which will pop up on your screen. I'll be launching the first one now. This just provides us with a better understanding of exactly who is joining us so that we can tailor our webinar for you. If you have any questions for Christian throughout the session, you can click on the Q&A section and ask your pertinent questions in there. Don't use the chat box function for your questions for Christian in relation to the webinar, as they might get missed. So we'll move on to the next slide. Now, before we dive in, I just want to quickly dive into our mission here at Crimson. Our mission is to empower young Australian students to compete on the world stage. Crimson aims to demystify the process of applying to the world's top universities, which can often be confusing and scary if you haven't done your research prior. We believe that education has the power to really transform our students' and families' lives, and we make it our sole focus to inspire as many of you as possible to reach a higher goal. On the next slide, you're able to see our overall admissions numbers, which we're so proud of and so excited about. They are the strongest globally, as we are the world's top admissions organisation. We've helped over 10,000 students into universities such as Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Oxford, Cambridge, LSE. The list is endless. Our students have secured 215 offers to Oxford, which is huge, and 167 offers to Cambridge as well. Equally impressive. So you can see tonight's agenda. First off, Christian will cover the differences and the similarities of the UK and Australian university system before moving on to breaking down the types of the top UK universities. He'll also cover how Australians can choose between the top UK universities, and we will also share an Australian student case study with you. So I'm going to hand it now over to my extraordinary colleague, Christian Kim, strategy consultant and Oxford alumni.
Thanks so much for that, Kiri. It's really great to see everybody. Really pleased to be here. You can see a little bit of my background on the slide there. So I also studied in the UK, but actually before that, I studied in Australia too. So I have a bit of a mixed background, and one that I think sets us up quite nicely to compare and contrast the two countries' education systems today. You can see there, I also grew up in New Zealand. So yeah, if there's any Kiwis out there, it's good to see you too. And you can see some of my students' results there. I focus mostly on the UK ones for today's presentation, but as Kiri mentioned, we've sent students all over the world. As Kiri mentioned as well, please do feel free to use the Q&A function liberally. I'll try to save as much time as I possibly can for the end to answer as many questions as we can. All right, well, let's keep going. And we will start off by comparing the UK and Australian university systems, right? Because there are some similarities and some differences. The way I often describe it to my students is that Australia sits somewhere in between the UK and the US. So it takes a little bit from the UK system, but it also takes a little bit from the US system. to give a slightly hybrid model, right? So you can see here some of the key things that sort of set the UK and the Australian systems apart. The big differences, I suppose, things like the student to staff ratio. You can see there's quite a big difference there. Of course, these are average numbers, but it is generally the case that the UK universities, especially some of the ones that most of our students are interested in, so places like Oxford and Cambridge, have much more generous student to staff ratios than perhaps some of the other Australian ones. Australian universities also have the potential to go for longer for an equivalent course. Now, of course, there are some degrees, like, for example, medicine or engineering, that are always going to be a bit longer. But what this slide is really breaking down is that even for the same degree, it can sometimes take a bit longer in Australia, especially once you take into consideration things like honours or double degrees or conjoint degrees, which are a possibility in Australia. You can also see that there is a slight difference in terms of the number of applications that you're allowed. In the UK, it is 5 across the entire country, whereas in Australia, it's still 5, but as you can see, per state, which means overall you could apply for more if you wanted to. There are also some differences in terms of the requirements. And as you can see on the presentation there, Australian universities do tend to be a bit easier to apply to. And I want to emphasize that, right? It's that they're easier to apply to, not necessarily to get into, right? So the process is a bit more simple, it's a bit more streamlined in comparison to some of the top-ranking UK universities, some of which we'll talk about later. But as you can see there, they are competitive for a reason, right? And these top UK universities are globally renowned in a way that some of the Australian universities sort of struggle to achieve. They also are interested in a bit earlier in your academic sort of lifetime, right? You can see the UK universities will start to assess your performance from about year 10, right? Unlike in Australia, as we're about to see, where they're primarily focused on your year 12 results, the UK universities will look further back to sort of try to get a sense of your academic journey rather than just where you've ended up at the end. And so as you can see that the systems are very different. And so you need a tailored strategy. You cannot just have a one-size-fits-all approach and expect to do equally well in both systems. Right. And as Kerry will explain later, that's really one of Crimson's strengths. We're able to help students to tailor their applications to the systems that they're applying to, so that even if you are, well, obviously you're one person, you can really emphasize the things that the UK wants to see for your UK applications, but emphasize the things that the Australian universities want to see in your Australian applications. So in terms of what the Australian universities want to see, you can see here that it's about academics, right? Top Australian universities are looking for students who've done well academically. I mean, that is really the bottom line. There are a few exceptions for some courses like, say, medicine or the performing arts, right, where you might be asked to submit maybe some essays or a portfolio, things like that. But for the vast, vast, vast majority of Australian courses, it will be about your academics. And you can see there some examples like the HSC, the VCE, WACE, IB, and so on, right? And that makes up 100% of your application as a local domestic Australian applicant, right? And they will look at your ATAR, that we'll see here. They'll look at your ATAR and determine whether they want to give you a place or not based on that number, right? And this slide does break down it gives you an indication, I think is how I would describe it, of what the ATAR requirements usually are for some of the top Australian universities. Clearly, this is at the lower end, right? So you can see, for example, in the case of the Australian National University, it's 85 plus, right? And so what that means is, so first of all, for those of you who might not be familiar with ATAR, ATAR is a percentile. So if you have an ATAR score of 85, what that means is that you were in the top 15% of your cohort for that year. And an ATAR score of 85 would get you into some of the programs at the ANU, the Australian National University, but not all of them. So others, like, say, law, for example, tends to be in the high 90s, as is medicine, right? Whereas perhaps something a bit more standard, like a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Commerce, you might be more competitive on a sort of 85 ATAR level. So yeah, it's noted at the bottom there, right? It can vary quite a lot depending on exactly what it is you want to study. But if you're finding yourself significantly below these numbers, you know, you might need to kind of reconsider kind of exactly what trajectory you're on. And Crimson, I think, again, has an excellent sort of system because it's a comprehensive program, right? Within your program, you not only get things like strategic guidance, which is what I specialize in, but also things like tutoring, in conjunction with your strategic guidance to ensure that your ATAR or your IB score or your A-level grades, whatever it may be, are at the level that they need to be for you to be competitive for the universities that you want to go to. So that's Australia. If we look on the other hand at the UK, you can see in the UK, they're looking for scholars, right? And so it takes sort of what the Australian universities look for, right, that academic ability, and goes that slight step further, right? That they not only want to see your ability demonstrated through your grades and things like that, they also want to see your passion for your field of study, right? They want to see that you have been really rigorous in how you've studied and what you've learned, right? And resilient in your pursuit of knowledge, right? And so, whereas before we had 100% put into the academics section for an Australian university application, you can see here it's 75%. It's a significant chunk. There's no doubt about that, right? But it's not all. And it's often not what distinguishes you when you're applying to these universities, especially the top UK universities, right? What they also look for on top of that are, you can see 15% go towards what we call supercurriculars, right? So if you're familiar with the term extracurriculars, this might look very similar. A supercurricular is a kind of extracurricular, and it's specifically an extracurricular that is related to the subject that you're wanting to study, right? And one of the great things that we found in our experience helping students get into top UK universities is that this can be in both very obvious ways, but also in some very creative ways, right? So an obvious example might be something like if you want to study maths at university, perhaps you engage with the Maths Olympiad, right? That would be a relatively straightforward one-for-one example of doing a supercurricular. But because you get the opportunity to write a personal statement for the UK, there's also the scope for you to be very creative about the way you engage with these things. So, for example, perhaps you're applying for physics, and your main kind of activity actually is netball, right? Well, you could write about how your experience of playing netball has helped you to better understand physics, or how it has furthered your interest in physics, right? So that would be a slightly unconventional way of also approaching that. But the key really is that they want to see how your activities have pushed you in that subject, either in terms of ability or in terms of interest. And in that regard, it's a little bit different from, say, the US, where in the US, they're more interested in how your activities have shaped your personal development, right? And kind of shaped you as a person rather than as a student. And of course, as we saw in the Australian context, they don't really ask that at all. It usually actually funnels into your ATAR score. The final 10% is basically the application itself. So UCAS is the platform that is used to apply to UK schools. And as I mentioned earlier, you can apply to a maximum of 5. And within there, you will have things like your personal statement. You'll have things like your reference from a teacher in most cases. And this won't happen through UCAS, but another part of your application, if you're applying for Oxford or Cambridge, or if you're applying for certain courses like medicine, would be the interview process. And even though it is 10%, the way I like to explain this to my students is it's actually like a set of hurdles, right? So the academics come first, and so they are the most important in that sense because you don't want to fall at that first hurdle. But once you've passed the sort of academic criteria that they set out, and we'll have a look at what that is in a moment, it actually very quickly drops off in terms of importance, right? Then you have your next hurdle of supercurriculars, right? And that will often be demonstrated in your personal statement. So there's a bit of overlap there. But once you have shown that, again, that quickly diminishes in terms of importance, and you get to that final stage of the interview, and it's only 10%, but it is that final hurdle that you need to cross in order to get admitted to some of these top UK universities. So that's what the rough process looks like. I hope that's helpful. If you're not sure of anything, please do drop me a question in the Q&A section. But for now, I want to sort of look at this here, the academics section for the UK. And I wouldn't pay too much attention to the acceptance rate, just to kind of highlight that from the beginning, because as you can see at the bottom there, it does vary a lot by course, right? So in the UK, similar to Australia, you can't just apply to the university, right? Like you could, for example, in the United States. You must specify a course. And as you can imagine, some courses are more popular and therefore more competitive than others. Right, so that acceptance rate, for example, of 15% at Oxford is an average of some courses having actually even close to 50%, although we'll talk about that in a moment, and others having closer to, for example, 10 or even 5%, right? So it's an average that doesn't really mean a whole lot. It's also a bit more difficult for international students, as you can see. And on top of that, to top it all off, like I mentioned, you can only apply to 5 schools. So there's a great deal of self-selection going on. If your academic grades are not at the level that you can see here, you can see IB and ATAR are examples given here, then in most cases, your school, your strategist and so on will not encourage you to make an application, because in the UK, they're really, really clear about what their cutoffs are, right? They will straight up tell you, if you are not at this academic level, we will not consider your application. So there's a great deal of self-selection going on there as well. So that is the caveat I would put on those acceptance rates. But I think that also explains why this section is of utmost importance. It's really, really important that you're familiar with what the grade requirements are for the schools that you're hoping to go to, because that is, as we saw on the previous slide, that big first hurdle. Your application will not be considered if you do not meet those grades, right? You could have the best supercurriculars, you could have an amazing personal statement, but if you don't meet these criteria, you won't be considered, right? So that's something to keep in mind, right? The final comparison point I want to draw between Australia and the UK is a slightly more practical one, right? It's about fees and scholarships, costs and things like that. International fees in the UK, they are broadly similar, and they are certainly on the higher end, as are all international fees in basically all countries, really. You can see there that there's quite a bit of variation between courses, right? So some can start at about £20,000 per year. Those are usually, for example, social science or humanities type subjects. Others can very quickly go over £35,000 per year for some kind of specialist STEM courses like medicine or dentistry. So it can be quite expensive, but I guess you must think of this as an investment, right? A lot of the benefits that we talked about earlier, right? And of course, if you are considering the US, well, that's I would say actually comparable, or if anything, actually a bit cheaper than the US as well. There are some scholarships available, right? However, as you can see on the slide there, they first of all tend to be relatively small. There are very few scholarships. They do exist, but there are very few scholarships that offer, for example, full rides or close to full rides. Whereas there is a kind of larger scattering of scholarships in the sort of £1,000 to £5,000 per year zone, which is not nothing, of course. If you do the currency conversion on that, I suspect that's about 2,000 to 10,000 Australian dollars, give or take, maybe a bit less. So it's not nothing. But as you can see, because of the high tuition fees, it won't be really anything close to a full ride. So that's worth considering. Although there are some more generous scholarships, like I've already mentioned, those are often tied to particular geographical regions. But it's worth looking into, because sometimes, for example, even if you live and reside in Australia, they actually will consider you for a scholarship if perhaps you might have an ethnic background in a particular country, or citizenship of a particular country, or things like that. So it's worth looking into. In terms of living costs as well, it depends on the city or the region. London, as you might expect, is the most expensive, but the cost can actually drop fairly quickly the further away you get from London. as a general rule. Yeah, and you can see that some northern cities, such as Sheffield, can be quite affordable in terms of living costs. Um, the final thing there is about food and getting yourself fed. You can see there that most university accommodation is self-catered, right? So that means there will be kitchens there and so on, and you can cook for yourself. There are pros and cons to that, of course, and if you were to work with Crimson, your strategist would walk you through all those and sort of what the factors are to consider and so forth. But that's just something to know. It's mostly self-catered. The exception to that is Oxbridge. So I'll be saying Oxbridge a lot, so I will just clarify to begin with, for those of you who aren't aware, Oxbridge is just a portmanteau. It's a combination of the words Oxford and Cambridge. I'll just use that to refer to both universities at the same time. And so you can see that last detail there. Oxbridge is slightly unique in that most of the accommodation is catered, and you can expect to be fed. Good. So hopefully that helps you to sort of start to see some of the differences between Australian universities and UK universities. As I said, if there are any particular questions on your minds, please do drop them in the Q&A section. Because for the next part, I want to dive a little bit deeper into these top UK universities and really start to break down how they differ at the different tiers, right? So starting with Oxbridge, moving down to the G5, which is the group of 5, so Oxbridge plus 3 more, and then the Russell group, which is a few more again, right? So starting with Oxbridge at the top, you can see here when we talk about Oxbridge, we are talking about two different universities. Of course, Oxford and Cambridge are separate entities, but they share a lot in common, right? Cambridge was actually modeled after Oxford when a group of scholars had to flee Oxford for historical reasons. It's quite a fun story. If you're interested, I encourage you to look that up. But yeah, the people who founded Cambridge modeled it after Oxford. So it is very, very similar in a lot of ways. But of course, over time, they have diverged a little bit and there are differences too, right? We'll break those down later on. You can see there they are special for a variety of reasons, I think. Some of the big ones that come to mind would be things like the incredibly generous student to staff ratio, right? And the fact that they actually utilize that, right? So a huge part of the Oxbridge educational system is learning through what are called tutorials, or what they call supervisions at Cambridge, but they're the same thing. Which basically involves having one tutor, so one professor, with usually between 1 to 3 students. And so it's an incredibly intimate learning environment where you have a chance to really pick the brain of an expert in that field for usually an hour or an hour and a half, and they will personally look over the essay that you've written or the problem sheet that you've completed and help to sort of identify your strengths and weaknesses and walk you through the topic for that week. So you can see that it's quite intense, right? In an environment of 3 students on average at most, there's nowhere to hide. If you haven't done the work for that week, if you haven't done the reading, if you haven't made yourself knowledgeable about the topic for that week, you're going to struggle a lot. It's not like a classroom of 25 people where you can sort of get away with not having done the work by avoiding eye contact and not raising your hand, right? It can be really, really intense. And because the terms or the semesters, as some people might think of them as, are very short, so only 8 weeks each, it's incredibly intense in terms of the pace, right? So what most other universities, so what, say, an Australian university might cover in 15 weeks would be covered in 8 weeks at Oxford or Cambridge, right? So it's a very fast-paced learning system as well. You can see that it's not going to suit everyone, right? And that's not a comment on someone's intelligence, right? Some people actually do a lot better, right? With the opportunity to take content slowly, right? And to really digest it fully, right? So it's about understanding what the best system is for you. But if you're all about high intensity, fast-paced learning in an environment where you'll be constantly challenged, then Oxbridge definitely will sort of have that competitive edge, I think, over anywhere in the world, right? I would say, this is more of a personal opinion, but I would say even the top American colleges can't rival Oxbridge in terms of the academic rigor. Right, so it's really, really for someone, as you can see in that bottom point there, for people who love academic work, they love their subject, they want to be challenged. And you can see a few more caveats like studying a traditional subject, which we'll get to later on. So that's Oxbridge, right? We can then expand that to the G5, which is, as I said, Oxbridge plus 3 more, right? And it's very well balanced, I think, actually. So you have one STEM specialist school, which is Imperial, right? So Imperial College London is a STEM specialist school, fantastic for things like physics, engineering, right? Computer science, right? These sorts of things. Often thought of as, if you're familiar with MIT in the United States, often thought of as the MIT of the UK, right? So very, very much a specialist school, right? In that regard. And then on the other side, you have the specialist school for the social sciences and the humanities, the London School of Economics, or slightly more wordy about the London School of Economics and Political Science. And you can see there, despite the name of economics or economics and political science, it actually teaches most of the social sciences and humanities, right? Politics, social studies, law, psychology, and obviously economics. So those are your two sort of specialist schools in the G5. And then you have University College London, or UCL, which is, it's sort of like a jack of all trades. It's a really nice all-rounder. It's a very large school, right? Which covers all of the sort of STEM and social sciences and humanities subjects. And again, it's a different sort of skill set, right? It's a jack of all trades, which means perhaps not as good as Imperial or the LSE in a particular subject, but you will have a better opportunity to learn a broad range of things, or a broader range of things at UCL. Right, so that's the G5. These would probably be, I would say, on average, the top 5 universities in the UK in any given year. And then it expands a little bit further to what we call the Russell Group, which is it's a self-styled group which sort of works very at the sort of top end of research, academic research, that is. There are currently 24. You can see it's the G5 plus the following 19 on the screen there. Yeah, and it's a bit like the Ivy League in the States in that a lot of people sort of think of it as, oh, this is what a top university is. In the States, the Ivy League is actually a sports league, right? In the UK, the Russell Group is actually a research symposium, but yeah, it's often used as a shorthand for elite UK university, in the same way that the Ivy League is often used as a shorthand for elite US university, right? But yes, again, some very, very good universities here, although there are several that are not in the Russell Group that are also very good. You can see a few examples there. Bath, has a sort of specialization in certain fields like business, science, technology, right? Loughborough is particularly good for sport, right? In sports science, things like that. Also business and technology, might add. And then you have St Andrews, which is in Scotland, which means it has a slightly different educational system. We probably won't have time to get too much into the weeds about that, but it's also, again, consistently very, very highly ranked. A bit of a jack of all trades itself, actually. And I believe it might have been Prince William who studied there, right? So it's sort of decent range of famous alumni as well.
And Kate.
Ah, yes, that's probably where they met, actually.
I think that's right.
Right? Yeah, there you go. So yeah, the Russell Group is not the be-all and end-all in the UK, just like the Ivy League is not the be-all and end-all in the US. But it's a helpful sort of way for us to conceptualize how the sort of top universities in each country work. If we look at these sort of top 10 universities, though, you can see here sort of how you might look at the top university rankings. So in 2025 for the Times Higher Education, which is a very well-renowned university rankings system, you can see already some familiar UK names, Oxford and Cambridge towards the top there, mixed in with a few American ones as well. Imperial College London, as I mentioned, is there, number 9. To actually find the top 10, you would have to go get down to eventually to number 53. And I think it's worth putting in context here as well, right? A number like 53 might not look that impressive next to 1 and 2 and 3, or 5 for Cambridge as it happens. But it's worth remembering these are global rankings, right? So 53rd in the world is actually an incredibly impressive place to be, right? I think for context, the Australian universities, I think the top ones sit around the 30-something mark, and can stretch down significantly further as well, right? So, 53 is very much a respectable place to be as well. Good. You can see here, though, when it comes to sort of the real creme de la creme, the top rankings, right? In this case, the top 20, the US does dominate, as you would expect for such a large country, right? They have 70% of those top 20 schools, but the UK really punches above its weight. And I think that's a testament to the intense academic system that is sort of in the UK. Right. I mean, you think about what I told you about the Oxford and Cambridge educational systems. It's hardly any surprise that that even though they're in a much smaller country, the UK, that they can kind of compete at that level. Right. And unfortunately, although who knows in the future, at least so far, Australian universities don't quite make the top 20. As I said, once you get to 30 something, I believe you can find one or two. But of course, it's not just about rankings. I mean, this is something we emphasize quite a lot in our strategy work with students, right? Rankings are helpful, right? They're a great indicator of things like research output, academic reputation, and so on. There are lots and lots of other factors to consider, right? I mean, just to name a few, you can see on the slide there, perhaps graduate salaries, right? What the network is like, whether it's alumni networks or student networks, career opportunities, right, which can often be different by school, right? Certain schools have certain connections to different industries with different companies even, and so forth, right? Are there particular professors who are well known at these universities, right? That's another possibility, right? How independent do you want to be, right? Do you want to be sort of in an environment where you have to cook everything for yourself and you're possibly far away from home, right? Sort of getting thrown in the deep end of adult life, or do you want to sort of halfway point, right? I mean, these are personal questions. There's no objective right or wrong answer there, as is the case with those other two you can see there about campus life, facilities, and the overall cultural fit, right? So there's a lot that goes into it, right? And without kind of speaking to each of you individually, I could never say you must go to the UK or you must go to an Australian university or any other university, right? Again, that's what I think Crimson really specializes in, helping students find these pathways by facilitating a really strong one-on-one connection between the student and the strategist, right? Having those regular meetings, getting to know each other over often extended periods of time, right, means that when the application season comes around, your strategist can give you some incredibly detailed advice based on what they know about not only your academic performance, but your personality, right, your hobbies even, right, all sorts. So yeah, a lot that goes into it. I mentioned a few things that are important other than rankings. I mean, career opportunities, right, was one of those, I think, at the very top of the list there, right? UK universities are very good for this, right? They're really, really well known for having strong career opportunities post-graduation, right? And you can see there, strong industry connections, careers services, a lot of them are lifetime careers services. So, for example, I've moved on from Oxford now, but, I was told many times when I was there, my relationship with the career service never ends. I could go back when I'm 50. I'm not 50, but I could go back when I'm 50. I could send them an email and say, "Hey, I graduated way back when. I'm looking for a job. Can you help me out?" And they would say yes. Right? I mean, it's a lifetime service. A service I might add, a lot of people might pay for, that you get as sort of part and parcel of your university experience. Right. And as you can see, there on-campus recruitment activities. I couldn't tell you the number of times we got all sorts of different companies from all sorts of different industries coming into Oxford, trying to scout out potential talent for their next cohort of graduates. Right. It's one of those things you get when you go to a top university. Right? I think it's one of those benefits that is often understated. Right. You're sort of assumed to be competent, right? As I'm sure you are. And so, a lot of these companies will sort of bend over backwards to try to recruit you, which is always helpful, especially when the job market turns a bit rougher, right? You can see there on the slide some different sort of areas where some of these universities might be well known. But I think overall, actually, you can get to a lot of different places from really any of these universities. You can see a few more examples. I won't spend too long laboring this point. If you have a particular university of interest, hopefully that's sort of where your eyes will go. Give you a few seconds to read through that if you are interested, but otherwise we'll probably move forward fairly quickly. Cool. So, looking at some notable alumni as well, again, I mean, this is not the most important thing, right? It's worth noting, of course, a good number of these people are no longer with us, unfortunately. But I think what this slide is really helping to show you is the caliber of people who might graduate from some of these schools, and who sort of you might meet when you're at these schools. To take an example in someone like, say, Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair, I picked them just because they're politicians and I know who they are, not for any other reason. But of course, during their Oxford years, who would have known that they would become prime minister, right? Lots of people, I'm sure, met Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair when they were at Oxford and just became friends because they just thought they were good people, right? But then, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, they became, the prime ministers, well, the prime minister of the UK in their respective times, and globally famous, right? I mean, it's just that kind of place, right? And that is something that generally happens a lot more in the UK than in Australia. And in fact, if you look through even, again, I'm going to pick on prime ministers because it's what I studied. I did philosophy, politics, and economics, right? A good number of Australian politicians as well actually have done stints in places like Oxford. It is well known, I think it was actually mentioned here on this slide, right? The Oxford Mafia. Oxford is well known as a sort of breeding ground for future successful politicians, right? But there's all sorts of kind of connotations that go with all sorts of different universities, in the UK. And you can see some examples on the slide there. Talking about the choice of subject as well, right? This is going to be a big, big thing, right? When it comes to how you choose which universities to apply to. Of course, you should never choose the university first and then just pick a subject from that list, right? You should be thinking about what you want to study and then finding the right universities to match that area of interest. And you can see there are some sort of reputations that are sort of assigned to these various different universities. Cambridge is sort of stereotypically known as the more STEM-heavy school, right? So you have your natural sciences, your maths, and your engineering, sort of well known for those things at Cambridge, whereas Oxford is your sort of social sciences and humanities specialist. Again, these are stereotypes, they're not entirely true. I think both universities are actually very good for both. But the subject offerings can be a bit different. So philosophy, politics, and economics, PPE, right, what I studied, is actually not offered at all at Cambridge, right? So it's not an option. Whereas maths and law, for example, you can see them under Cambridge and Oxford, respectively, there are actually offered at both, right? And at that point, it actually becomes sort of a preference in terms of how the program is structured. Again, a lot of that detail comes from the strategy work that we do working with students. If you are interested in maths, which one should you apply to? What are the differences? And so on. You can see a couple more examples here, right? Imperial College London, University of Edinburgh. Again, I don't want to labor the point too much. But yeah, different reputations for these different schools. I guess it matters a lot more for a school like Imperial College London, which is a specialist school, right? So they actually wouldn't offer things like, say, law. So even though Imperial College London is very, very highly ranked, if you want to study law, it's a bit of a no-brainer. You wouldn't be applying to Imperial College London, right? And again, this is the kind of thing your strategist can really break down for you and essentially save you a lot of time, right, and help you to make an informed decision when the time comes. Good. I'm just going to really, really quickly breeze through these because this is essentially a lot of information about kind of how different UK universities rank in terms of their different subjects. If you are particularly interested in a certain subject, I'm hoping that your eyes will sort of go there and you'll be able to very quickly digest the information. And if you're not, then I'll be moving to the next slide shortly. So I might just give a few seconds on each slide. You can see here there's computer science, mechanical engineering, and electronics/electrical engineering. On this slide here, we have medicine, law, maths, and chemistry. Again, slightly different. It's worth noting, for example, for some subjects, I'm thinking of chemistry here on this slide. Chemistry is actually not offered at Cambridge as its own standalone subject. So it comes under what's called the natural sciences degree, which requires you to either do chemistry with biology or chemistry with physics, right? Whereas, for example, at Oxford, which is only number 2 on this list, you can do chemistry on its own, right? So again, it's not just a matter of I like chemistry, so I'm going to apply to Cambridge, right? You need to understand what the nuanced differences are between each program to ensure that you're doing the program that actually aligns with your interests and your strengths and potentially even your future career goals, right? And I emphasize again, that's really where Crimson's team of strategists, often people who have graduated from these universities, can provide a lot of specialist insight. But again, looking at a few more, right? English, architecture, economics, and business are the ones on this slide. So hopefully, you'll catch those if you're interested in any of those. And the last one, you can see here, communication and media, art and design, earth and marine science, and town planning as a slightly different example there. Again, hopefully, if you're interested, you'll have caught those. And then covering a few sort of notable professors, right? You can see here some kind of famous people, people like Stephen Hawking, I suppose, right? Really jump out. But again, some of these people are no longer with us. The point I'm trying to make with this slide is really the caliber, right? You think about Nobel Prize winners, you think about really globally known experts, the vast majority of them are in the US or the UK, right? Australian professors, I mean, as I said, I studied in Australia. They're fantastic. There's no doubt about that, right? But if you're looking for that sort of global level knowledge, you're much, much more likely to find it in the US or the UK. In the UK instance, especially in places like Cambridge and Oxford, right? So that's something worth considering. As well as some more unique facilities, some of the largest libraries in the world, certainly some of the oldest libraries in the world, in places like Oxford or Cambridge, as well as some various different famous institutes, as you can see there. If you've heard of Dolly the sheep, I think was the first animal to be successfully cloned, genetically cloned. That, for example, was in Edinburgh, right? And various things like that. But I'll probably pass over now to Kerry for a few minutes to run through, I think, a case study. But yeah, I'll be back for the Q&A.
I'm so happy that Christian mentioned Edinburgh. Edinburgh is my old home. So I'm very pleased run through this particular case study with you. We have we're lucky, extraordinarily grateful and lucky to have some amazing case studies that have come through Crimson. So this particular student was lucky enough to be admitted into Oxford and Imperial and ultimately accepted Oxford, had a 99.808R, a PAT score of 90, an ESSET score of you can see individually across maths and physics, very, very strong scores, as close to 9 as possible, almost perfect. And the VCE curriculum subjects that she studied were English as an additional language, methods, spec, or specialist maths, chemistry, physics, and biology. So she did go for the traditional archetypical high ranking subjects. So, and she also, to back that up, because obviously it's not enough to only have the strong academics, which she's very fortunate to have, she had some outstanding super curriculars. So she was the 2022, 2023, 2024 AMC High Distinctions, 2023 Australian Physics, Chemistry, Biology Olympiad High Distinctions, Physics Top 24. So that's again a really a real highlight for her. That area placed 49th in the Physics Bowl globally, 2024 Space Design Competition Australia finalist. Melbourne Uni Maths Competition, maths and statistics. You can see the kind of shape we're going in. Maths enrichment, Premier VCE awards. We see a lot of those, which is terrific. Vice Chancellors International and Sir John Monash Scholarship for Monash University as well. So the admissions timeline, as you can see at Crimson. So it's really important, and obviously this is ideal. This is the ideal way to go about it. But please do not stress out there if you're kind of still building certain elements. We can help you. It's a reason Crimson exists, is to provide you with support to get everything done within the time frame that you have. So in years 7 to 9, we're building your candidacy, building your soft skills, time management, and really getting those study skills embedded. So academic strategy courses, projects, building an ECL profile, and trying out those local competitions to get that practice in. Grade 10 to 11, candidacy, deep exploration and application, deep exploration of the areas of your interest, maybe perhaps taking an A-level or an AP course, building ECL projects, attempting national, international competitions. Grade 12, really heavy getting into the application, working it around your school exams and assessments, deciding on that final list and deadlines, beginning your essays, reaching out for the letters of reference and obtaining those leadership roles. Grade 12, again, so it's split up into January, obviously January to May, because you don't want to be starting your applications later. Better to start them early. So drafting and finalizing is June to December, compiling your activities, lists, achievements, and application information, and final UK aptitude tests, and obviously preparing being ready, I'd say, for your interviews. December to March, situational, really depends on where you're at and what offers, and work on deferral, waitlist strategies, possibly do some sort of internship, some separate study, possibly. August to September, pack your bags, get on that plane, go look at your new digs, and enjoy your first semester in college. Now, this is different. This is your US timeline. And it's similar, I would say, in terms of the time place, but deadlines. So US early decision and EA varies by college, November the 1st to November the 3rd, so quite early. Applying with a predicted ATAR or IB score and additional qualifications. Whereas Oxbridge the deadline is October the 15th, again, very, very early. Applying with a predicted ATAR or IB score, again, additional qualifications. US regular decisions are January to January the 15th. So similar to Australia. Applying with actual ATAR IB scores and additional qualifications. UK regular decisions, January the 15th. Quite late, I suppose. Essays, drafting, finalising, compiling achievements, final UK aptitude tests are actually that late as well. Interviews, free time, January to July, travel, intern, study maybe something, work, travel. And then August to September, college orientation, move in, family orientation day, and get started. How can Crimson help? So our key core support basically consists of a three-pronged approach, but this is not everything, I have to say. Crimson is an extraordinarily amazing place full of different products, services, and talent bouncing off the walls. Academic support, standardized tests, your UCAT, LNAT, BMAT no longer exists, SATs, your PAT tests, CGA AP courses to extend yourself with university level qualifications prior, Revision Village, which is an amazing product which enables you to get perfect sevens across your IB subjects, extracurricular support, capstone, creating your own project with a team around you, Indigo for academic research with PhD and professor level support, or Crimson Honours, preparation classes for global competitions with panels to then provide you with feedback, Delta Careers, Ferrari, we even had Lunar Rover, we've got legal, banking, all sorts, medical, even the NHS. Competitive summer programs. We've got amazing programs you can take part in. We have Model UN, we've got Oxford Summer Scholars, where you can go and actually take part in the residential experience there. Support with art portfolios, and creative portfolios, application strategy for the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, Europe, Hong Kong, Asia, undergraduate and postgraduate, MBA, athletic recruitment, huge, application review by former admissions officers as well, and panels. We're very, very lucky to have very talented team members here. So, from world-leading university alumni to PhDs, we go out of our way to source and recruit staff who are, without exaggeration, the best at what they do. And they're also really dedicated, and they're there to support you. We're not just doing a job, we're really working as a team to provide the best possible support for our students who are aiming for either the Ivy League, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, and many other top universities, UCL, Edinburgh, Europe. And our teams have been there and done that and know from firsthand experience what it takes to gain admission at a top-ranked university. So identify your individual needs, book a consult with someone such as myself, if you'd like to.
And worth noting, I think I'm right in saying that's completely free with no obligation.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely is. It's more about finding out about how we can support you and what we can provide for you.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, you have everything to gain and literally nothing to lose, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more about sort of showing you how we can support you in an individual way, because each of you is going to be an individual. So yeah, we're there to support you on your US and UK admissions trajectory, so to speak.
Awesome.
So if you'd like to speak to someone such as myself or one of my colleagues for a free strategy session, where we can map out what it would take for you to get to where you're going and get to know you better, please do book a consultation here. I know you can all see the poll that's come up on your screens, and we very much would look forward to meeting you. I know I can see some of you that have already had this and are onboarded, and I'm so excited to see you here today. I hope you find this very, very invaluable. Christian is one of our amazing strategists as well, so you can actually see exactly what kind of support, the level of support that you get here.
Amazing. Well, I think that leaves us with just the Q&A. So yeah, thanks for that, Kiri. I can see a couple questions, so I suppose we can start with the ones we have, and if any more come up, we'll go from there. So I can see a question asking, how do the job opportunities compare across the G5? Are there employers who don't recruit from Oxbridge? I don't know of any particular employers who specifically don't recruit from Oxbridge. Although I suppose perhaps what this question is alluding to is that increasingly some employers do operate a sort of more general criteria. So whereas in the past it was Oxbridge is the top and then there's everyone else, right? Some employers are now like, at the top there's the G5 and then there's everyone else, or there's the Russell Group and then there's everyone else. Right, so I think there are some steps moving in that direction, although there is certainly still an emphasis, at least in some corners, on the Oxbridge background. I would say overall the G5 are very, very good in terms of employability. Yeah, incredibly strong, really, really strong. And I would say not only in the UK, but around the world, right? I mean, even if you return to Australia, having that Oxbridge background, I have to imagine is a very, very strong thing to have on your CV as well. Um, I see a question about what branches of law are offered at Oxford and/or Cambridge. The short answer is all of them. So you can follow sort of any route. It at the undergraduate level. So for a bachelor's degree in law at Oxford or Cambridge, it will be fairly predetermined, right? So there's a kind of set of compulsory courses, especially for a subject like law, because in order for a degree to actually count as a qualifying degree in law, you need to cover a certain range of courses. And so all of those will be covered as part of the course by definition. And then the flexibility is really in the sort of how many options you get, and then you can explore the avenues. But if your question is about what avenues might there be, basically any field of law you can imagine will be available. It's just a difference really of how many compulsory courses there are. What those compulsory courses are is also a key difference. So one example might be that jurisprudence, so the philosophy of law, right? Is law real, right? Why should we obey the law? These sorts of questions would be jurisprudence questions. That's compulsory at Oxford, but it's an option at Cambridge, right? So, these sorts of differences might apply. But broad strokes, it would be a very similar set of options at both Oxford or Cambridge for law. Are all school grades considered or just year 12/8R? So in Australia, it would be just year 12/8R, right? For the UK, it looks a bit further back, usually up to about year 9 or year 10. But it is worth noting, I should emphasize that it's not that they're expecting you to have a perfect set of grades right from year 9 or 10. What they're looking at is the trajectory of your grades. Have you been improving, right? Have you been challenging yourself, or have you been sort of just skating through? These are the sorts of things they're looking for, not kind of trying to catch you out on, oh, you happen to get a B in this grade, for this semester,
Yeah.
and therefore you're out. It's nothing like that, right? I think I mentioned earlier that in the UK context, they have a very, very clear set of requirements. As long as you meet those requirements, you're fine, right? You're in a competitive you're at the competitive level, right? Obviously, exceeding them is fantastic, but if you're at that level, you don't have anything to worry about, right? After that, really, it's about the other stuff, the supercurriculars, the admissions tests, the interview, the personal statement, your reference, these sorts of factors. Again, for the UK, for Australia, it's just 8R. I think yes, I think there are actually a couple of questions in the chat as well. I'll very quickly run through those. Do they offer a dual degree in most of the universities? In Australia, yes. So you can do what's called a conjoint degree or a double degree, right? And so you might combine some subjects like commerce, right, and economics or something in there with, say, politics, right, in the Bachelor of Arts. And so you can combine them in that way. And you can end up with some quite wacky combinations because it's very flexible in Australia, kind of what you pair with pair. In the UK, it's less flexible, and there are some degrees where you can do multiple subjects. So mine, of course, was philosophy, politics, and economics, right? So 3 subjects. But if there are combinations of subjects, they're often predetermined by the university. So I studied philosophy, politics, and economics because that was offered by the university. I didn't just turn up and say, I want to study philosophy, politics, and economics, right? So the university websites for the UK will actually have a big list of the courses they offer. Some of them individual standalone subjects, I don't know, history, right? But also some combinations like history and English or something, right? But it's up to the university to decide that in the UK, whereas you have a bit more flexibility in Australia. Salaries for Oxford lawyers, how much does it cost to have to study law at Oxford? These actually, I think you can find online, so I'll probably leave those to you to find out. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you should be able to find that information online. Do we have Oxford in Australia? I'm not quite following that question. Oxford is in the UK, so I guess no is the short answer to that question. But yeah, no, I think that covers everything. If you do have further questions, again, this is not the end of the road, right? Schedule in a consult
Please
with
do.
someone like Kiri, and she will be able to help you answer the questions and possibly send you to someone like me if we seem like a good fit.
And we map out what the trajectory is going to look like for you, depending on the area that you're wanting to study, or if it is that you're really wanting, you're not sure exactly what it is that you'd like to study. We have ways. We have people here that are able to help you. Academically, we provide support across the curriculum in Australia and outside. We have people that are experts at what they do here and are here to help you ramp up and provide you with that mentoring and that support. Nobody does anything as great as this on their own. Everyone has some sort of help, and this is more about really putting a supportive team around you to help you achieve your dreams and your goals.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, I think that's the end of the questions as well. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. But yeah, hand over to Kiri for.
Oh, and I mean, thank you so much, Christian. I hope you have all learnt so much from listening and watching. I always learn so much from listening to Christian speak about his journey and also about the support that Crimson can provide. Yay, Christian. That's okay.
Thanks so much.
We
I
will
think
reach
that
out
gives me
to you,
something.
Matt and Gay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye bye.